You say your company can transfer VHS tapes to digital or disc-based formats, but my question is, can you transfer the digital or disc-based content to VHS? What do you mean, who would want that? What do you know? Jerk. Everyone knows VHS tapes are always the way to go for home media experience. And I mention this now because there are quite a few movies or shows that never really made it beyond VHS. Some, perhaps due to controversy. I've done videos on Let It Be and Get Back. Some maybe they just don't see a market for. They were kind of a product of their time, and there really isn't maybe a reason to upgrade them. Some were such big failures that even if they were available on a new format, I don't even think they have the cult following necessary to warrant people buying them. I've talked about Stoogemania before too. If you haven't seen it, don't worry, you're not missing anything. And some maybe are kind of buried in controversy or confusion. Greed, of course, has been recut and restored and unrecut and unrestored and so on, and even now I think it's technically in the public domain, but even then we don't exactly see a flood of fan edits or possibly illegitimate copies. So I want to spend a couple videos talking about the movies that didn't make it past VHS. Maybe not just movies, maybe some shows too. So I picked out 3 unusual ones for today. And what better place to start than with one of the rarest videos that I own, Billy Wilder's final film, 1981's Buddy Buddy. You can see there Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau, the odd couple themselves. Buddy Buddy is often regarded as Wilder's worst movie. I don't think it is. It's not up to the usual standards that we would expect from him, though. Of course, Billy Wilder, a director with a very prominent output. Here's the Billy Wilder DVD box. Several of his films have become household names at one time or another. The Apartment, of course, a Best Picture winner, as was The Lost Weekend, which is not in this set, but is a great film. And perhaps he's most remembered today for a little movie called, there it is, Some Like It Hot, which also featured Jack Lemmon. So Billy Wilder liked to make sort of sex comedies, comedy of errors, kind of farces and whatnot. His very first American film, The Major and the Minor, Ray Milland's Major, falls in love with Ginger Rogers, who's pretending to be a 12-year-old girl to save on train fare and whatnot. That could have come off as really scummy and kind of seedy, but it's done with such innocence and warmth and such a gentle touch that it never feels that way. Some Like It Hot, of course, a comedy about dressing in drag and getting away from criminals and the complications of falling in love with a woman when you are supposed to, you know, not be doing that because you're disguised as one, whatnot. So a lot of great films there, but he would disown Buddy Buddy much later on. And Buddy Buddy has never gotten a home media release past this VHS tape, that at least not that I can find, and certainly not in the United States anyway. There could be some foreign DVDs. Honestly, it's a pretty juvenile film. Instead of these very witty, urbane, humorous observations, we get a lot of, you know, very uncreative, kind of dirty jokes. Jack Lemmon's character, seen there hanging out the window, is a TV censor who becomes irrationally offended when he hears, you know, sexual words or things that couldn't be said on TV. And of course, Mathau's character is the hitman there, dangling him out the window. Loves to deliver those kind of words, and so a lot of the banter is just him freaking out when he hears, you know, a sexual word or whatnot. It's pretty, you know, Family Guy level stuff, but there are some very good bits. Mathau is the highlight of the film as the hitman Trabuco. His job is to perform one last contract killing before he can retire, and if he fails, it's his own life on the line. And naturally, Lemmon keeps interfering with this in various comical ways. But Mathau's actually really good. He'd played villains before in movies like Charlie Varick and Charade, and he'd played tough guys before, like in The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. So honestly, casting him as a hitman who has kind of a comical edge, but still a physical presence and a physical danger, works pretty well. Lemmon is such a great actor. Love him in Save the Tiger and Mr. Roberts and Grumpy Old Men, also appearing him in Mathau. But here he's just too unhinged and too grating. Paula Prentice, as Lemon's estranged wife, is really given nothing to do, which is a shame. Dana Elcar from MacGyver, he turns up briefly, but he doesn't get a whole lot to do either. Klaus Kinski as Dr. Zuckerbrot, human sexologist, and the man who Lemon's wife is completely enamored with. And Joan Shawley, a frequent collaborator in Wilder films. She was in The Apartment and Irma la Douce and Some Like It Hot, pops up as Klaus Kinski's lesbian secretary, and she gets the best line in the film when a couple wants to give birth at the Sex Institute, and she says, "We don't deal with the finished product here." My favorite part of the movie. But, you know, it's got some bad jokes, but it's an interesting watch. I think a lot of people just write it off if they even ever get to see it. It's not an easy film to find. But it has its moments. If you want some just dumb pseudo-action comedy, you could certainly do a lot worse. And Matthau and Lemon have an interesting chemistry here. This is the only one of the many films they did together where they start off as strangers and then kind of come together. It gives it kind of a different dynamic. They don't do enough with that, I don't think. But, you know, if you like Billy Wilder like I do, it's worth checking out. And, again, don't come in expecting Some Like It Hot or The Apartment or something like that. Just accept it for kind of a cheapo comedy. The whole film was on YouTube for a while, and all the comments were like, yeah, you know, this would be a fun TV movie. And that's kind of the vibes we're getting. A juvenile sort of TV movie. So let's go from, you know, TV movie, crass, vulgar, that kind of thing, to something much more posh and much more stately. Mr. George Arliss in Disraeli from 1929, a very early sound film, and was up for Best Picture of 1930, losing to one of the few early sound films that still has a big following today, the original All Quiet on the Western Front. Great film, and one that, despite being made when sound, you know, filmmaking was in its infancy, has aged really well, and all the remakes and many war films that came after borrow very heavily from it. Disraeli does suffer from a lot of those kind of early sound issues. It's very stagey in places. It was based on a play, so I guess that makes sense. Very stagey. There are some actors who are projecting their lines to the back row and dramatically overacting so all can see. And you do see some of that. It's like, you don't need to yell. You are in a movie. You will be heard, I promise. But George Arliss makes up for it. Indeed, he won an Oscar for his role as Benjamin Disraeli, Prime Minister of England under Queen Victoria, or one of the Prime Ministers under Queen Victoria. This deals with Disraeli's attempt to purchase the Suez Canal. When Egypt is in dire need of money, they're willing to sell to the highest bidder, and he has to beat out the Russian agents who want to purchase it and then use it, presumably, to conquer, or at least control, portions of India. It's an interesting story, and I'm certainly no expert on this in terms of historical context, but the film makes sure to explain all the points and whatnot, and Arliss is really good as Disraeli. He played the part on stage and in the silent film version, but he acts with such a naturalness and a gentleness that, unlike his co-stars who are yelling and shouting and carrying on, he's actually pretty subdued and comes off as much more modern. He still has a few moments where he gestures dramatically, and there's one where he's angry, so he raises his hands and yells to the heavens and whatnot, and it's like, okay, I could have done without that. But all told, a very worthy Oscar winner. I'm kind of surprised that this hasn't gotten a newer home media release, because it is a Best Actor winner. You know, you'd think there are people who collect various Oscar-winning films, and not just Best Picture, but Best Director or what have you. So I'm kind of surprised this one never did. This is an edited version of the film. The complete print doesn't exist, but it's not missing anything substantial. There's a couple weird cuts here and there where things were snipped out, notably when Arliss is talking to other characters about having kids and raising a family. Maybe some dirty joke there that wouldn't have flown. But all told, I really liked Disraeli. Had a good time with it. I'd recommend it. And it's not anywhere near as tedious as some early sound films are. And the last one I want to talk about today is one I talked about last Halloween. I did a video where I picked a horror film from each decade and talked about them, and I really liked that video, but nobody watched it. It's the second least viewed video on my channel. So I want to talk about The Keep again, because The Keep is just a fascinating movie. And mostly for its production history. The Keep had a very troubled shoot and edit and so on. And what started as a 210-minute movie, an adaptation of the novel of the same name, was cut down to about 2 hours, which was cut down to about an hour and a half. Indeed, this is a 96-minute movie. So you started with 210 and got down to 96. In case you couldn't tell, that means there's a lot of stuff missing. And this is perhaps the biggest drawback to the keep, is even not being familiar with the source material. Like me, I could still tell, yeah, there's definitely stuff missing here. Notably in terms of our hero, played by Scott Glenn from Silence of the Lambs and Personal Best and stuff. Here he gets to walk around shirtless a lot and be our 1980s beefcake hero, but his entire backstory is cut. His entire character arc is cut. Even his role in the conclusion is cut. We're left with scenes of him walking around with purple eyes, freaking out, and of course all the softcore sex scenes, because what would an 80s horror movie be without some random softcore sex scenes? It's, you know, a very unique watch. I will say the supporting cast makes up for Glenn's lack of, well, stuff to work with, really. Most of his scenes got cut. So a good supporting cast: Jürgen Prochnow as a Nazi, Gabriel Byrne as a Nazi, and Ian McKellen as a Jewish kind of occult expert, I guess you could say, as the Nazis move into this strange Romanian castle, which is obviously haunted by some demonic force. He's called in to determine what it is and how to get rid of it. And it's a very interesting movie in terms of its appearance. It's very well made and well filmed. It's just that we're missing so much. There are bits that don't work also. Of course, when we finally see this demonic force, Molosaur, he looks like a fugitive from Power Rangers. You know, it's not a very convincing monster suit. But he starts as kind of like this weird ethereal thing, which is like vaguely human features, and that's kind of neat, because you can tell it's something, but you can't tell what it is, because it's buried in like clouds and smoke. I like that. And if they had kept that as the monster instead of going full rubber suit, I think we would have had a much better experience. I gotta say too, it nails the World War II period feel, despite having a really funky Tangerine Dream synthesizer soundtrack, which works really well. You know, you wouldn't think for a World War II movie you'd want something like that, but it is pretty nifty. Ian McKellen's character has probably the biggest bearing on the story. I said this last Halloween, I'll say it again. Where the Keep really works is as a golem story. This force that is incredibly powerful, awakened, and someone thinks they can control it and use it for their own ends, but we know they can't. They're not as smart as they think they are. They're blinded by their anger, so Ian McKellen sees this as a chance to kill the Nazis and get revenge for what they're doing to, you know, all of his friends and family members and whatnot. And we know that's only going to last so long. But interestingly, we only really ever see Molosaur kill Nazis, so what's so bad about that? Because all the other scenes were cut. And there are many videos on YouTube that have deleted footage from trailers or promotional magazines, things like that. So, despite not having much of a beginning or much of an ending, The Keep's a pretty fascinating watch. When I watched Season 1 of Stranger Things, this was the movie I kept thinking of, because for some reason that show reminds me so much of this movie. I don't know, but pretty cool. The Keep has gotten one home media re-release, I think in Australia, to DVD, and I think it might be available for streaming now too. I'm not sure, but in terms of if you want a physical copy for your Keep, then you'd have to fork out for VHS, unless you have one of those region-free DVD players or something like that. So here's 3 for today. Join us in the future, of course. In the future, of course, we'll talk about Shining Time Station. We'll talk about the Thames silent releases, like The Crowd and The Wind. And of course, we'll talk about Looking for Mr. Goodbar and other films that just have kind of fallen between the cracks as time's gone on. So, and don't be worried about Beach Boys content. There'll be plenty more of that coming up too. So, hope you enjoy a little video. Please comment below with some of your favorite VHS tapes, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.